Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Lexbe webinar series, your destination for practical insights into e-discovery, generative AI, and digital forensics that help you win your cases faster and more effectively. I'm Jeff Fugit, Chief Revenue Officer here at Lexbe, and I'm thrilled to have you with us today. Today's session brings together timeliness persuasion principles from Aristotle's Pathos, Ethos, and Logos, as taught by our special guest, Chris Schandevel. I'm excited to have Chris present today. He's one of the best legal writers in the business and is often referred to as the brief writing ninja. After Chris, you'll hear how Lexbe's Gen AI suite, consisting of Pilot, Copilot, and Autopilot, can help you amplify your persuasion through clarity, credibility, precision, and confidence. You'll see how Gen AI has quickly become indispensable in litigation. Before we get started, just a few quick reminders. Lexbe hosts monthly webinars in e-discovery, digital forensics, and Gen AI best practices and strategies. If you experience any technical issues, please email us at webinars@lexbe.com and we'll assist you right away. Follow us on LinkedIn for e-discovery best practices, links to on-demand webinars, and invitations for upcoming events. You'll also receive a recording, slide deck, and podcast version of today's session after the event. We encourage questions, so submit them anytime through the Q&A panel on the web conference interface. And finally, please complete the brief survey at the end of today's webinars so we can continue improving these sessions. Before I turn it over to Chris, just a quick intro to Lexbe in case you're new to us. Lexbe has spent over 19 years helping legal teams win document-intensive litigation, and we do that with Lexbe Pilot, which is a Gen AI-powered full case analytics and query tool that outperforms legacy early case assessment technologies. You can ask Lexbe Pilot any question that you have about the case or documents in the case. It also generates a strategic case insights report with a single click. Lexbe Autopilot, which is Gen AI-powered automated document review for responsiveness and privilege. It has outstanding precision and recall scores and is a fraction of the cost of traditional managed review. It also works great for third-party subpoenas and document-intensive matters, and it's much more transparent than legacy TAR. Lexbe Copilot, which is your Gen AI-powered assistant for your inline document review. It's included in every Lexbe plan at no extra cost. The use cases are only limited by your imagination. If you have acronym-intensive documents, Lexbe Copilot will define those for you. If you need to summarize lengthy medical records or depositions, Copilot does a great job of that. Do you need to analyze financial statements and transactions? Lexbe Copilot will provide you with a comprehensive delimited report of the money movement. Do you need to compare two contracts to determine which one's more favorable for the buyer or the seller? Lexbe Copilot will provide you with a comprehensive analysis, and it can do much more. In the past few months, we've had over 400% growth in customers adopting Lexbe Copilot. In addition, we have lightning fast processing. We have over 1,000 CPUs that power our platform, which processes over 1 million documents an hour. One recent client uploaded 1.64 terabytes of PSTs, and we're reviewing those the same day. We also have an intuitive, user-friendly interface. And we also have award-winning customer service that was rated best by Gartner. In addition, we have a state-of-the-art digital forensic lab staffed with Celebrite and Magnet Axiom certified forensic investigators to help you acquire the evidence that you need for your cases. Remote or on-site, smartphones, cloud accounts, social media, we've got you covered. If you'd like a demo or a complimentary forensic consultation, email us at sales@lexbe.com. We'd love to show you how Lexbe can support your next case. We're honored to welcome Chris Schandevel, Senior Counsel with Alliance Defending Freedom and a national expert on persuasive legal writing. Chris is a master at blending artistry and advocacy. His teachings on Pathos, Ethos, and Logos have helped countless attorneys refine their writing, connect with judges, and elevate their storytelling. Chris, welcome, and thank you for being here.
All right, thanks, Jeff, and thanks so much for inviting me to do this today. I am thrilled to be here. Thrilled to talk to all of you who are attending today on the topic of legal writing. It's a topic that I am passionate about, I get really excited about, and I really enjoy talking about. I will let you know just kind of a housekeeping matters as we get started. Number one, I'm very much a visual learner. So what you're going to see today in the presentation is a lot of examples from cases that I've litigated, examples from briefs from opposing counsel, usually of what not to do in a brief, then examples of cases and briefs that I filed myself, hopefully some better examples of what to do, when the goal is to persuade judges to like you, trust you, and join you. So the topic of our discussion today is using Pathos, Ethos, and Logos in legal writing, when the goal is, again, to persuade judges to like you, trust you, and join you. I will, at the end of the presentation, have a slide up that has my email address. I encourage folks, if you have questions, like I said, I love this topic. I'm always happy to answer questions if you have them. So feel free to reach out to me via email. Feel free to also find me on LinkedIn and connect with me and message me there. I do a lot of, I put out a lot of legal writing content on LinkedIn as well. It's kind of become a pet passion of mine that I do a little bit on the side. So look forward to continuing the conversation with all of you today. But as we get started today, I want to kind of pose a question to you there in the audience. I'm going to do this kind of throughout the presentation today, and just want you to kind of take a beat to think about how you would answer this question. So first of all, what would you say is the primary goal of most forms of legal writing? What are you trying to achieve? If you could boil it down to just one word, what one word would you choose? Because for me, I think the answer to that question is pretty simple. And the answer is persuasion, especially when it comes to doing the type of brief writing that I do, which is legal writing for judges in litigation. The goal is always to persuade. The goal is to persuade judges to rule for your client, to issue an opinion that reads the law in a specific way to advance the best interests of your clients. And so the question that we should always be asking ourselves when we're doing legal writing is, how does this choice that I'm making, whether it's the words that I'm putting on the page, the arguments that I'm choosing to focus on, or even smaller choices like formatting, what font I'm choosing, how big are my margins, etc. All those questions should be filtered through that one larger question of, does this help advance the goal of persuading the judge that I'm speaking to do the thing that I'm asking him or her to do? And more specifically today, putting some more meat on those bones, how does this persuade the judge that I'm writing to like me and my client, to trust me, and to join me in the outcome that I'm advocating for? So we'll explore those three themes together here today. So I've kind of built this presentation around Aristotle's definition of persuasion and how persuasion is achieved. And this is a quote that he wrote back in 360 BC, and I think it still holds true for us today. He says, "Of the modes of persuasion furnished by the spoken word," I think it applies equally to the written word, "there are three kinds. The first kind depends on the personal character of the speaker. The second, and that's the ethos, the second on putting the speaker in the correct frame of mind, a certain frame of mind, that's the pathos. And the third on the proof, or the apparent proof, provided by the words of the speech itself, which is the logos." So again, it's not just a matter of, well, as long as my arguments are logical, then therefore they will be as persuasive as they can possibly be. Because the reality is that's oftentimes not the case. We as lawyers tend to focus a lot on the logic behind our arguments. And sometimes I think too many of us default to a position that says, well, as long as I've got all the right arguments on the page, as long as my arguments have logic to them and reason to them, then I should win, automatically by default. It should be enough just to get the right arguments onto the page. But what Aristotle would teach us is that's only a third of the persuasion process, because that forgets about the ethos and the pathos of persuasion. And those 2 points are equally important. So we're going to spend the bulk of our time today discussing first pathos and then ethos, and how different choices you make in writing a brief affect the persuasive value of your brief from a perspective of pathos and ethos. Then we'll spend a little bit of time at the end covering a couple quick points on the logos. So I always warn people when I give this presentation, I have a lot to get through. And I'm really excited about this topic. And when that happens, I tend to talk super fast. So buckle up, get ready to dive in with me. And if we run out of time at the end, I'll make sure that Jeff gets you the slides. So you'll have the slides on the logos specifically. But we will be spending more time on the pathos and the ethos today. So let's just start with the pathos, persuading judges to like you, and by extension, persuading judges to like your client. This is what, again, Aristotle says about pathos. He says, persuasion may come through the hearers when the speech stirs their emotions. Our judgments when we are pleased and friendly are not the same as when we are pained and hostile. So what you want to be asking yourself when you're writing a brief, you want to be putting yourself in the judge's shoes and asking, how is what I'm writing and how is the manner in which I'm putting it on the page going to make the judge feel towards me as the advocate? It's going to lead the judge to feel pleased and friendly towards me and appreciative of me, or pained and hostile towards me. Same thing in terms of your client. Is the way that I'm portraying my client in this brief going to make the judges feel pleased and friendly towards them, are going to lead the judges to feel kind of pained and hostile or aggressive and to dislike my client? And in order to really answer those questions well and be thinking through them well as we write the brief, we need to make sure we know a few things about our audience. So it's worth discussing and thinking about a few things about judges specifically and what is some things that are unique to them. So we'll do that for each of these three, the pathos, the ethos, and the logos. We'll hit on some key characteristics of judges. So for pathos, we know that judges are human. So ChatGPT has not yet taken over the legal profession in terms of deciding case outcomes for us, fortunately. I think a few attorneys have farmed out too much of the legal practice to ChatGPT, and we've seen some of the harms of that. But so long as judges are still wearing the robes and deciding the cases, they will continue to be human. And so it's worth thinking about that as we're writing our brief. Secondly, judges are very busy. Like the rest of us tend to be very busy. So how should that affect the way that you write your briefs? And then third, judges are distracted, just like all of us are these days. And so how should you be thinking about constructing your brief in a way that makes room for the fact that they are human, busy, and distracted? And how can you frame your brief, write your brief in a way that makes them feel good towards you and like you and appreciate that you're taking these characteristics of theirs into account in the way that you write your brief. So let's get more specific and look at some specific examples. So judges are human, and recognizing that, you'll want to do a couple of things. One, you will want to care about how your brief looks. You will want to make your brief pretty and aesthetically pleasing, because that gets them into a frame of mind where they're more likely to feel good about that brief they're cracking open if they see from the very start it's a brief that is carefully and well done. Secondly, it's worth thinking about how can I make my brief tell a story in the statement of facts, but also in the argument section, the way that you construct your arguments. How can you play to the fact that judges are humans and humans learn through storytelling? And one kind of caveat before we dive into some examples on this, yes, judges are human, and so it's worth appealing to their emotion in the way that you write the brief, portray the facts, portray the arguments. But unlike juries, judges are a lot more skeptical when it comes to direct appeals to their emotion. So one different way of doing this when you're speaking to judges, especially in appellate courts, like I do, is your goal isn't to tell them how to feel. The goal is to give them the stimuli that they need to feel the way that you want them to feel on their own. So, for example, I had an appellate judge I clerked for right after law school. And we talked about the practice of law, and I was getting ready to take the job in the Virginia AG's office doing criminal appeals. And one piece of advice he gave me, he said, yes, get all your legal arguments right. But remember that judges are human too. And he was a very by-the-book judge, always about following the law. But he also said judges are human. So if the party on the other side happens to be a scumbag, it doesn't hurt to show the facts in the record that prove that the other side, the party on the other side, is a bit of a scumbag. Now, again, you don't say that explicitly. You don't tell the court how to feel, but you give the court enough facts to show and not tell, and let the court draw its own conclusions. And that's always more powerful. When the judges feel like they're drawing their conclusions for themselves, those conclusions are a lot more likely to stick with them. So We'll see what that looks like on the next slide. Well, a couple slides from now, I guess, when we get into the storytelling element. But first of all, let's talk about the aesthetics. So make your brief look pretty, and that starts all the way on page 1 with your cover page. So if you'll just take a second, look at the brief that I've put up on the screen for you and kind of ask yourself, how does this cover page make me feel? What do I like about it? What do I dislike about it? But even setting those specifics aside, how do I feel? And just kind of looking at this brief. I'll give you a second just to kind of think about that. Because I'll tell you, as I look at this brief, my feeling, my takeaway, kind of a couple. One is I feel a little bit unsettled. And I'm not entirely, it's not immediately clear why, but if you look a little bit more closely, you see, for example, the use of white space. There's a lot of white space going on this page. And there's also no there's no borders. So there's no top or bottom borders to kind of give the cover page some stability. So it's just kind of floating there in the ether almost in all of that white space. The second thing that you might know is that if you look at all of the different types of font, there really aren't a lot of different types of font. Everything is in the same bold. Everything is in the same size, the same font. So it's kind of plain. It's kind of boring. So you might pick up this brief and think to yourself, this is kind of just going to be a boring, plain Jane, run-of-the-mill brief. There's nothing special, nothing unique, nothing interesting about it, which is not what you want the court thinking when it's picking up your brief for the first time. You might also notice some things that are a little bit off. So the brief for the Commonwealth in the middle of the page, if you look at the bars above it and below it, the bar above it is longer than the bar below it, and it's not entirely clear why that would be. And again, the entire thing is just not centered well on the page. There's a lot more white space below the bottom of the brief. That's why I've got that giant X there than there is at the top of the cover page. So all these things together might make the reader think, man, what is this brief writer? Clearly, they don't put a lot of time into thinking about how their brief comes across and making sure they get all the details just right. Unfortunately, this was a brief that I myself filed. This was the very first brief that I filed when I was at the state attorney general's office. And I really just followed a format that someone else in the office had given me. This is what all of our briefs had always looked like for the longest time. So I filed it, but then it really bothered me. So I got to thinking, how can I make this brief look better? And so I took a shot at that. So if you look at there's 2 examples here. One's from my old job at the AG's office on the left side of the screen. The second one is on the right side is my current job at Alliance Defending Freedom. But the brief on the left side is how my briefs ultimately came to look. Even I think as the very second brief that I filed in that office, I decided I'm going to make this look more professional, more put together. So I added some borders on the top and the bottom of the screen. Just went into Microsoft Word like anyone else would and found the settings for borders and threw one at the top and threw one at the bottom. I changed some of the sizes of the words. So Supreme Court of Virginia is larger than it was previously. I made sure my use of white space was balanced. So you see the same amount of space on the top of the page as you've got at the bottom of the page. All of which is should lead you to think to yourself, if you're asking, how does this cover make me feel? Hopefully now this makes you feel good about the person who wrote the brief. It inspires some more confidence. Like this person this brief looks more put together. So the person writing it probably is put together too, and is probably paying close attention to details. And so if they're paying close attention to details with the smaller things, they're more likely to be paying close attention to details with the larger things too. Same thing for the brief on the right side of the screen. So obviously there's a lot more on the page, and that's just simply a result of the fact that the clients we represent in my current job, it's not just the Commonwealth of Virginia, the single client. We represent a whole paragraph worth of clients now. And it's not just me and the Attorney General on the brief like it was before. Now it's me and a bunch of coworkers who are colleagues who worked on the brief with me. So a lot more has to fit onto the page, but you can see hopefully that there's still the same level of attention to detail to make sure everything is centered nicely. The white space is being used effectively and equally throughout the brief. You've got those bars, those borders that are setting parts of the brief apart and giving it that stability that makes clear that the person who wrote the brief cares about the finer points, and just the brief has a nice feel to it, and hopefully puts the judge or the law clerk reading the brief in a better frame of mind as they open that brief before they've even read a single word on the page. But of course, it's not just the cover page you have to think about. It's throughout the brief. You have to think about what choices am I making, formatting choices am I making, and how does that make the reader feel? So you want to make sure you're choosing an aesthetically pleasing font and making aesthetically pleasing formatting choices. So again, I would encourage you to ask yourself, look at the brief that you have up on the screen. How does this make you feel as the reader? Are you feeling pleased and friendly, or are you feeling pained and hostile? I will tell you that as I look at that brief, this is a brief that was filed by an opposing counsel in a case that I litigated, and my immediate feeling was pained and hostile. I felt like I wanted to claw my eyes out. How many of you in the audience right now actually want to read that giant block of text on your screen? I'm guessing very few of you actually want to read that. So what are the problems? First of all, it's a bad font choice. It's an Arial font choice, which is a sans serif font. Arial was initially thought to be better for screen reading, even though it's thought to be not as ideal for reading in print. Fortunately, with digital technology getting better, serif fonts like Century Schoolbook are just as easy to read on a screen as sans serif fonts these days, and fonts like Century Schoolbook that have little serifs on the end are better for reading in print. So best to choose a serif font for your brief, not a sans serif font like Arial here. Other problem is it's in all caps. Everything is underlined, everything is bolded. And if you look closely at that point heading, it's actually two main points all crammed together in one big block of text. So there's no white space helping the reader out, giving the reader a chance to breathe, a chance to pause and separate out and think through the two different issues being raised at once. So this is obviously not what you want to give your reader. By contrast, this is a much more aesthetically pleasing just look. Even if you're not reading the words and thinking through the arguments, just looking at what you see on the page, how does this make you feel? Hopefully, this causes you to breathe a big sigh of relief and to feel pleased and friendly to the author writing this brief. This looks like a brief that's going to be pleasant to read, as opposed to a brief that's going to cause you to again want to scratch your eyes out. So a few of the improvements. First of all, the brief is using Century Schoolbook, which is a much easier font to read. I'll say a little bit more about that a few slides from now. Secondly, the point headings are all in sentence case instead of in all caps or even initial caps. So one quick point for you on this, a lot of attorneys will use initial caps for their point headings, which is where instead of doing all caps, you only capitalize the first word, the first letter of every important word in the point heading. A few problems with that. First of all, attorneys have a hard time figuring out which words they're supposed to capitalize. So some of them just default to capitalizing all of them, which isn't even technically correct. Secondly, but the more important problem with that is because we're used to seeing initial caps used for titles like movie titles and book titles, our brains get kind of conditioned to think when we're reading something written in initial caps, what we're reading is going to be a short phrase, not a complete thought. So if you're writing a point heading in a complete sentence and spelling out a complete thought, which is the best practice for your point headings, the brain trying to read a complete sentence point heading that's written in initial caps gets tricked because it reads the first 3 or 4 words and it thinks, oh, this is initial caps. This must be a phrase. So I'm going to just read a phrase and then I'll stop. And then there's more words. And so then the brain thinks, okay, well, here's another phrase. And so it reads that phrase and then it stops, but then there's more words. And so your brain often, you might even find yourself having to go back and read a point heading multiple times if it's written in initial caps, because it's really hard to get our brains to think of an entire point heading written in initial caps as one complete thought. So it's much better and easier on the reader just to use regular sentence case when you're writing a complete point heading like this. If you're writing the main section heading like argument, summary of argument, statement of the case, those can be all caps and bold, and that's fine because it's just, again, a short phrase. But when you have a complete thought, a complete sentence, you want to use regular sentence case. So those are a few of the things that just the stylistic choices before we even get to the exact words that are being chosen, the stylistic choices that make a brief more pleasant to read and therefore help with that persuasive, that pathos element of the persuasion process. All right, now moving to making it tell a story. As humans, judges, like the rest of us, tend to learn best when information is presented in story form. You're much more likely to remember a story that I tell today in this presentation than you are to remember all the individual pieces of facts and information that I might throw at you. So judges are the same way. If you can think about how do I package the information that I need the judge to hear and understand in a way that tells a story, that's a much better way to improve, again, that pathos element of persuasion, and also to improve the odds that that part of your statement of facts or that part of your argument section is going to stick with the judge, and the persuasion process can continue even after they put down your brief and stop reading your brief. So I've given you an example on the page here. I do want to just spend a moment with this example. So this is a case that I briefed and argued at the Virginia Attorney General's office. This is a brief that I myself wrote. And so we're describing a case. It's a criminal case, a man who was convicted for malicious wounding. This was a home invasion where a really sad case, a man broke into a home and just kind of brutally assaulted a woman and her son while they're sleeping in the middle of the night. And so before you even get to that, though, what actually ultimately happens, it's worth taking some time to kind of set the stage, to paint the picture for the reader. And so I'll just read my first couple of paragraphs here. Around 9:30 p.m. on the evening of January 21st, 2015, Alan Freeman and his elderly mother, Norma Jean, shared a pizza at their home in Madison Heights, Virginia. Norma Jean was 81 years old and had trouble hearing. She was suffering from dementia and could not live by herself, so Alan had moved in to take care of her. After dinner, Alan helped his mother get ready for bed. Once Norma Jean was under the covers, Alan lay down on the bed next to her. Alan slept in his mother's room because she became scared every night and asked him if he would mind sleeping with her. So just to pause there, I want you to think about, what are some literary themes that you might see coming out even in those just first two paragraphs. So for one thing, anyone who's got any sort of a journalist background in the audience, the who, what, when, where, and why, you see a lot of those elements being painted right in that opening sentence. What time it was of night, what part of the time of the year it was, who were the main characters, who was involved in this, where they were at their home in Madison Heights, Virginia, and what they were doing. They were sharing a pizza together. So setting the full stage for the reader. Another literary element that I like to use is the basic theme of good guys versus bad guys. And that's a very easy theme to develop in litigation because you always have some good guys and some bad guys. If you're representing clients, those are your good guys. In my case, at the AG's office, I was speaking for victims. So the victims were always my good guys. And the party on the other side is always the bad guy. You always want to portray them in a negative light. And so in setting up the story, you can choose facts and portray facts accurately, of course, with the record, but you can make certain stylistic choices that paint that picture for your reader. And then also another element that I like to use is foreshadowing. So you see the very first heading there, heading A says the attack. So the reader immediately knows that there's an attack coming. There's something important and even something very bad that's going to happen. And it kind of hooks the reader and brings the reader into the story right away where they want to know where this is heading and what's going to happen next. And they have some sense of what that's going to look like. Also, another form of foreshadowing there at the end, I highlight the fact that Alan's mom got scared every night. So again, some foreshadowing that something bad is going to happen later in the night. And that not only did she get scared every night, but in this particular night, unfortunately, she had reason to be afraid. And then that also connects with another point, which is that it's very helpful to include details that humanize whoever your client is. So it's very easy in this case where you're representing real people. Some of you may be representing companies or organizations. Some of you may be representing government entities. So you may have to work a little extra hard to humanize those clients, but there are ways that you can do that. And it's very important to share the human side of your client because humans connect with humans, and getting back to the fact that judges are human. So I've included details in this account, like the fact that they were sharing a pizza together. You can literally see them in your mind sitting down at the table and eating this pizza together, this elderly woman and her son. Everything that Alan is doing to help out his mom. You can see a doting son who cares about his aging mother and is doing everything he can to take care of her. Using their first names throughout the account instead of last names also helps to humanize them. And also then telling the story from their their perspective. So I'm not literally speaking for them, but I'm painting the picture through the lens of what they would be seeing and what they would be experiencing. So try to paint the statement of facts, whoever you're representing, whoever your client is, as telling the picture as they experienced it, telling the story from their point of view. Because if you can get your audience to see the case through your client's point of view and the facts, you're much more likely to get them to see the case through your client's point of view when it comes to the argument section. So again, make the brief tell a story, do it in the facts, and also think about how you can do it in the argument section itself. And I don't have a slide for you on that today, but think about, for example, in explaining the development of the case law that you're relying on. Instead of just reciting, here are the main cases, can you arrange the cases chronologically and use them to tell a story about how the law has developed and how it's developed in a way that's favorable to your client? I think, again, weaving in aspects of storytelling is a great way to get the story of your case and the argument that you're trying to get across to really stick with the reader so it stays with them even after they put down the brief. So that is judges are human. We'll move now to judges are busy. And so you want to do a couple things. You want to make your brief readable for them, and you want to make sure you avoid frustrating them as they're reading that brief because they are busy. Judges have increasingly heavy caseloads across the country. They have to read your briefs. But the reality is oftentimes judges are so busy they don't want to pick up a brief and spend a lot of time reading it. And so you've really got to work against that, because what you don't want is the judge to be so busy that they pick up a brief and they just skim through it as quickly as possible, your brief, skim through as quickly as possible and then put it down again. You also don't want them to pick up a brief and for it to be a real chore and a burden for them to slog their way through that brief because, again, they're busy. They need to get back to the next thing. So what you do want to do is write a brief that they enjoy reading, that they will appreciate reading, and that actually causes them to slow down and kind of savor the brief because it's just so well written in a way that really captures their attention. So it's worth putting in that extra effort. So they spend more time with your brief and they're enjoying the process of reading it, which again makes them in a better frame of mind to be more likely to accept the actual legal arguments that you're writing in your brief. So starting with making your brief readable, you want to avoid using jargon, avoid using a bunch of legalese, avoid overly long sentences and parentheticals, avoid anything that if you yourself were the reader, that you would just hate to have to read. And so here's another example. Anytime you see the red X, you're going to pretty much know that it's an example from a brief from opposing counsel early in my career, which is an example of what not to do. And so I'm going to start, I just want to do something real quick. So making your brief readable, if you will, just read with me the first sentence that you see on the page there. I'm going to read kind of fast, so you might have to read quickly to keep up, but we'll read only the first sentence. It says, the indictment does not specify the statements defendant allegedly made that constituted perjury, and it is important to pin down exactly wherein the Commonwealth contended the perjury consisted because it referred at various times to two discrete sets of statements made under oath. One, that she denied driving, and two, that she had denied admitting driving to Miller. Parenthetical, the Commonwealth also contended she had admitted over the phone to Scopoletti to driving, but did not ever ask Harsha in the General District Court whether she had made such admission to Scopoletti. That is one sentence. That is one giant, long, complicated, multi-part sentence with a giant, long, complicated parenthetical thrown in just for good measure. So again, how do you feel reading that? And how likely are you to feel like, I want to keep reading, I can't wait to see what comes next in the brief? Or how likely are you to just want to shut the brief, throw it out the window, and hope that you never have to come back to it? So you want to avoid using jargon. You see the wherein, constituted, contended, various, discrete, such. All those words are multi-syllable words that lawyers like to use, but there are almost always better, shorter, easier to read and understand alternatives to those words. So instead of saying something like contended, just say argued or claimed. And instead of saying, such case, say this case, for example. So look for plain English alternatives to all the legalese that we tend to use. By contrast, this brief, hopefully you'll notice, I'm not going to read the entire thing, but this is a lot more readable. And the reasons for that are, one, it uses plain English, so it doesn't use a lot of legalese or jargon. 2, the sentence lengths are varied. So by saying avoid overly long sentences, I'm not saying all your sentences have to be short, but for the reader's sake, you want to vary it so that some sentences are short, some sentences are long. So the point heading itself, black controls this case. Very short, crisp point heading, but you know exactly what is being conveyed there. But then some of the sentences are much longer if you kind of read through the brief. So the goal is to average for about 20 words a sentence. You don't want all 20-word sentences. You want some 3 or 4 word sentences, and you want some 25 or 30 word sentences, but you want that variety for the reader because it makes it more readable, more interesting, easier to get through. A few other things, you see this font choice here that I used is Century Schoolbook instead of Arial or even Times New Roman. The reason I'm very opposed to Times New Roman, and I know a lot of folks in the audience probably love it and use it, Times New Roman was designed by a newspaper publisher, the Times of London, and it was designed specifically to be used in newspapers so that they could cram more text into those skinny columns that you see on the newspaper pages. And because of that, it was literally designed to be skimmed like you would a newspaper, not designed to be read carefully and slowly like a book. And the problem, hopefully you all are making this connection in your heads right now, do you want your briefs to be quickly skimmed and thrown aside like a newspaper? Or do you want them to be read carefully like a book? Obviously, the answer is door number 2. You want your briefs to be read carefully like a book, to be enjoyed, to be fully absorbed. And so it's better to choose a font that was designed to be used in books. And Century Schoolbook is my favorite font choice for that reason. It was designed in 1924 to be used in grade school textbooks, which is how it got its name. So think like the Dick and Jane series. Those books were written in Century Schoolbook. So it was meant to be carefully read instead of skimmed. And it even has like a nostalgic feel to it because, again, it was designed for those grade school textbooks. And many of us may have even seen it when we were first learning how to read. It's the font choice that the U.S. Supreme Court uses, that the U.S. Solicitor General's office uses. So it's also just got a very good pedigree in terms of who uses it and approves it. So you can pretty much, unless it's not on the approved list of fonts and the jurisdiction you're in, you can really never go wrong with using Century Schoolbook. The only other thing that I'll mention for you here is that you see the second sentence on the page there, but Turner has not tried to distinguish them in any meaningful way. Starting a sentence with a conjunction, and, but, or so, adds punch to a brief that starting the sentence with a word like however, or consequently, or accordingly, which is what most attorneys do, you lose that punchiness when you start a sentence that way. So much better to start a sentence with and, but, or so. And also, you don't have to include a comma after that and, but, or so, like a lot of writers will do. Including a comma right after and, but, or so really slows down the sentence before it even gets started, and you lose the benefit of that punchiness. You want readable text, you want readable prose, start those sentences and this happened next, but this is not the case. So this is the reason for the thing that you just explained. It's also just a lot easier for the reader to follow because we know immediately that if you say and, you're just saying more of the same. If you say but, you're going to show a contrast. If you say so, you're making a causal connection. So those words, I'm convinced that 90% of legal writing could be improved dramatically if people just tripled the amount of sentence starting coordinating conjunctions and but and so that they used in their briefs. So make it readable for your reader. And finally, on this point, judges are distracted. So make your brief easy for them to digest. By one estimate, judges are distracted every 9 minutes. So they're getting texts, they're getting phone calls, they're getting emails, they're having clerks stop by their offices to ask them questions. I was one of those clerks. And so you want to make it easy for the judge to read your brief in kind of bite-sized chunks and not give them just giant blocks of text on the page. That's really hard for them to slog through and really easy for them to lose their place if they get distracted. So I'll give you a couple of examples of how to do that and how not to do that, starting with how not to do that. So point headings. Point headings are very important when it comes to making your brief easy for your judge to digest. But what you don't want to do is what the two examples here show. So the first example, you've got 7 lines of text in that first point heading. You've even got not just one sentence there, but 2 sentences there in that first point heading. So that is a lot of information that you're giving the reader and telling them they have to keep in their head before they move on to reading what comes next in that section. Ideally, strive for no more than 2 or 3 lines for a point heading, so you're just not overwhelming the reader with too much information to keep up with. The second point heading is at least shorter, but it has a very different problem, but it's still an equally problematic issue with it. So if you read it, plaintiff's various attacks on the district court's standing analysis lack merit. So that tells you what the next section of the brief is going to broadly talk about, but it doesn't give you any of the reasons why the advocate is saying these attacks on the standing analysis lack merit. So without giving the reader a kind of a guidepost, this is the reason why the standing analysis that the district court did was correct. The reader goes into that, however many pages follow that point heading, not really knowing what specifically to be expecting. And here in this specific brief, because I went back and checked, that was the only point heading in the brief for a 9-page section of the argument. And not only is it conclusory, but that's 9 pages of text, and the only intro you're giving the reader is something that doesn't really tell them a whole lot. So that is not a good way to make your brief digestible. By contrast, these are 2 examples from briefs that I filed that hopefully you'll be able to tell just by looking are a lot better. So the first point heading, you see immediately that it's 3 lines instead of 6 or 7. So it's short enough to be easy to digest. It also gives the reason behind the argument, not just the conclusory argument itself. So it gives the reader a better sense of what's coming. The second point heading, if you just look at point C, if you read that by itself, even applying federal case law, the school violated Laming state constitutional free exercise rights. That by itself actually sounds a bit conclusory. So you might think I'm violating the rule I just told you on the page before. But what you have right below it is subheading 1. So C1, the school tried to force Laming to confess his agreement with messages that violate his religious beliefs. So the Smith case does not apply. So you can do a conclusory main heading as long as your subheadings that follow it immediately thereafter give the reasons for the conclusory main heading, because not only on the page when you're reading in the brief will you get the argument supporting the main takeaway paired together, also in the table of contents, you'll get the 2 of them paired there together. So even though C by itself is a bit conclusory, because it's paired closely with C1, you're giving the reader everything that he or she needs to fully digest the point that you're trying to make. In terms of how often to include a subheading, I mentioned 9 pages is far too long to go without adding a subheading. I personally strive for 3 to 5 pages before per subsection. So if I know I've gone 5 or 6 pages, I'm immediately thinking to myself, okay, I need to find a way to either shorten this subsection or start my next subsection. And if I find myself writing a 7-page subsection, I'm asking, is there a way that I could split these 7 pages into 2 smaller subsections? So again, I'm trying to give the reader bite-sized chunks of information to process, so you're not overloading the reader with too much information at once. All right, on one more point on making it digestible, I like to tell people to avoid block quotes like the plague. I know a lot of folks are fans of block quotes. Sometimes, especially early in my practice, I was a big fan of them because I thought, well, what does the court think? What does the court care about what I have to say? Much better to give the court a giant block of text of something that it has already said. So I'll just quote the court's cases back to it and do a big block quote, and that'll be a lot more persuasive than anything that I have to say. The problem with that is that in reality, if you poll judges, the vast majority of them tend to skim at best, or at worst, skip entirely anything that's a block quote in the brief. Because again, it's not a digestible amount of information. It's a giant block of text all meshed together without any break in it from you as the author, as the speaker, explaining to the reader what that giant block of text means. So the worst thing you can do is give a giant block quote with absolutely zero lead in. Something you do that's a little bit better is at least to give the reader, if you're insisting on using a block quote, the 2 examples of times when I think it's permissible are if you're litigating over a contract provision or a specific statute, a specific statutory provision. It can be useful there because the court needs to see exactly what the provision says, and sometimes it's long enough that it needs to be in a block quote. And if it's the language that's being litigated, the court is going to be kind of forced to read it, so there's less of a chance of skipping over it. But there, at the very least, you should do what I did in this better, the second example on your screen, where you give a lead in and kind of give an intro of like what the reader should be focused on and looking for in that block of text. And then within the text itself, use some italics to call out the pieces of language that are the most important so the reader knows what to be looking for. And then finally, the best example, I think, is just to take everything out of the block quote. Actually, you can use all the same quotes, but just weave them into your own text. That way, you're not losing your voice on the reader. The reader is not like losing your own voice in terms of not being able to hear you anymore and just being able to hear the court speaking, because it gets a lot less interesting if you're just quoting someone else for lines and lines of text. It's much more interesting if you can keep your voice and weave your voice together with the court's voice. So you're speaking the first half of the sentence and maybe you're quoting the court for the second half of the sentence and doing that multiple times throughout. So that's a much better approach to keeping it digestible. So that's pathos. Secondly, ethos. This is one we tend to do a little bit better with as attorneys. We at least realize that we're not supposed to lie to the judges, because if we lie to them, they're a lot less likely to believe us. But the reality is there's a lot more to credibility than just not telling bald-faced lies, right? Aristotle says persuasion is achieved by the speaker's personal character when the speech is so spoken as to make us think him credible. We believe good men more fully and more readily than others. So know that judges are perceptive. So if you are not dotting your I's and crossing your T's, they're gonna notice those small mistakes, and it's gonna give them reasons to doubt you even on the bigger things that are the more important things. Judges are cynical, so they're not likely to just trust you out of the gate. And then judges can be unforgiving, at least professionally. So if you make tiny mistakes in your briefing, again, that is going to really start to erode your credibility on the bigger things. So just running through a few of these, and since we're getting closer to our 1 hour mark, I'll move a little bit more quickly. But know that judges are perceptive, so don't overpromise and underdeliver. And when you're criticizing, whether it's the other side's arguments or criticizing a lower court, if you're on appeal, be careful to show and not tell, because judges tend to get very defensive of other judges and also get defensive of the bar in general. So, for example, starting with not overpromising and under-delivering, avoid words like absolute, obviously, clearly, plainly, any words that oversell what you have to prove in order to persuade the court to rule in your favor. So it's amazing to me that, sometimes we find ourselves in a case that's a really hard legal standard, like a clearly erroneous standard. And as the litigant, you want to do anything that you can if you're trying to overcome a test like that, to not have to prove that a decision was clearly erroneous, because that's such a high bar to have to meet. And yet so many of us still say things like, the district court clearly erred, or the law clearly shows, or the opposing party's argument is clearly wrong, when we don't have to prove that the other side is clearly incorrect or the district court's error was a clear error if we're not under a legal standard that requires that high of a showing. So why say the other side was clearly wrong if all you have to say is that the other side is wrong? Why say that the judge below is clearly erred if all you have to show is that the judge below erred? So avoid words like that, no matter how tempted you are to use them, because you really feel that you're correct. It's much more powerful to just say the district court erred, the opposing party is wrong, and then explain the reasons why they're wrong. Secondly, show, don't tell. This is example not actually from a brief, but an example from a recent Supreme Court oral argument where Lisa Blatt, who's one of the best Supreme Court advocates in the country right now, are tempted to fall victim to of just blatantly accusing opposing counsel of telling a lie at the lectern. How many times have you wanted to say in your brief, opposing counsel is being disingenuous, that's false, that's a lie, et cetera, et cetera. The problem is that is judging the heart of opposing counsel. You don't really know the intention for why the other side gets something badly wrong or the district court gets something badly wrong. And judges tend to be defensive on behalf of the bar, on behalf of other judges. So much better to show, don't tell. So say what the other side is arguing that you think is maybe dishonest. Don't say that you think it's dishonest. Just quote them directly. Say something like, but that's wrong. And then give the reader exactly what they need to draw their own conclusions. And then say, the record shows X, and then quote the record and do it in a way that makes clear and obvious that the other side is incorrect. So, and let the reader draw their own conclusion from that. So I'm giving you an example here. In the interest of time, I'll just leave this with you in your slides to review on your own time. This is a case where I thought opposing counsel had gotten something so badly wrong in their brief by omitting a large portion of the authority that they were citing that, to me, that omission felt intentional and even felt a little bit disingenuous. But again, you don't want to say that it was disingenuous, but you do want to call out the omission or call out the false statement so that the judges see it, and then just make it so obvious that they can't miss it, and then let them draw their own conclusions. Because if they draw the conclusion that the other side is being dishonest or disingenuous, that's going to be much more powerful and, again, much more likely to stick with them. then if you tell them that that's your read on the facts and that's what you think they should conclude, they're much more likely to be resistant to that. Next, judges are cynical, so show your work. Don't force the judge to take your word for it. So here's an example of what not to do. If you look at the giant string cite with the red X there, those are a lot of cases that may or may not support what the advocate is arguing for in this portion of the brief. But there's just absolutely no way to know unless you go behind the advocate and look up each of those cases on Westlaw or Lexis to see what they actually say. So don't force the reader to stop and check behind you, because that adds zero persuasive value when the reader is actually reading your brief. So much better to do, again, what I said earlier, let the court's voice and your voice become one. So instead of just giving a string cite without parentheticals, even instead of including parentheticals with quotes in them, pull those quotes from the cases you're relying on out of the parentheticals and weave them together with your voice and with your language, and then tell a story in the brief. Describe what happened in the case, describe what happened in the case law, show your work to the reader, because then they're much more likely to be persuaded as they read the brief, instead of feeling like they can't start being persuaded until they've taken the time to set the brief aside and check your work behind you by pulling up those authorities. And finally, judges are unforgiving. So be faithful in the little things and sweat the small stuff. So here's an example from a brief from opposing counsel. The 5 little X's on the page are typos and just blue book citation errors that should immediately jump out at you if you've ever used a blue book. And the reason I love this example is because if you look at the giant X that I have on the screen, that's beside a case called Black versus Commonwealth, which my opposing counsel was relying heavily on in his brief. The problem with his reliance on that Supreme Court of Virginia case so heavily in his brief, even though we were briefing a case in the Supreme Court of Virginia, so you would assume that that was a good authority for him to rely on, that case had been overruled by the U.S. Supreme Court when it had been appealed up. So it was no longer good law for the authority that he was citing it for. So pretty indicative of the fact that if you see a lot of small errors being made in a brief, a court is going to have good reason to be more likely to doubt that you're getting the bigger things right. And here is a perfect example where that was the case. So show the judges, I sweat the small stuff, I get the details right, I avoid typos, I do proper blue booking, etc. That sends the signal that you can also trust me to get the big things right. So we are about out of time. I told you we might run out of time before we got to logos, which is the logic of the argument. So I'm going to run through these slides very quickly, and then I'll turn things back over to Jeff. But judges are persuadable. Assume that they're persuadable, and then think about however you organize the brief. Can you do it in a way that proves a truth or an apparent truth by means of the persuasive arguments that are suitable to the case in question? So here, remembering that judges are persuadable, they are smart, and they are risk averse kind of as a class. So how can you use those in your favor? So they're persuadable. Don't sleep on any opportunities to start persuading them and to keep persuading them throughout the brief. So I like to highlight tables of contents as the best opportunity to start persuading. Here's an example of a table of contents that does nothing to persuade because it's entirely conclusory. Whereas by contrast, here's a much better table of contents that spells out the entire argument and gives a preview of everything that's to come right there on page 1 of the brief. So the judge can immediately start thinking through the arguments that are going to be made in the brief and immediately start the process of persuasion right there from the beginning. Secondly, in the conclusion, don't sleep on the conclusion. A lot of attorneys will say, for the reasons mentioned, the court should affirm. Unless the rules require such a conclusion, think about how can I reframe the case, reframe the facts, reframe the law, reframe what's at issue here in kind of a new and interesting way that doesn't just regurgitate everything I've said before, but gives the court one final pitch for why it should rule in favor of my client. So I'll give you an example of one way in which I have done that in a brief that I filed. Judges are smart, so you can afford to be subtle. You don't have to hit them over the head with every single argument, especially in times when you should be showing instead of telling. But you also can't afford to hide the ball or to try to get away with things, because they'll catch you on that too. So a couple pointers on that. Don't lead with rebuttal. I once had a case where, as the appellee, I knew exactly why the appellant's arguments were all wrong, but I had a hard time figuring out for the life of me why the position I wanted to advance was right. And since I represented the government in that case, we actually ended up conceding that the district court made a mistake in that case and it was reversible error. Because the judge is going to notice, it's one thing to say, these are all the reasons why the other side is wrong, but you actually have to make an affirmative case as to why you're correct, because the judge is going to want to know that. And it's best to lead with that and then rebut the other side's argument after you've already advanced your affirmative case. So lead with that positive case. This is a better structured table of contents and structure for the arguments. And then finally, knowing that judges are risk averse. So warn them of the risk of getting overruled. Warn them of the risk of maybe creating a circuit split if you're in a federal appellate court and they're worried about cert being granted on that case. But do it gently. Again, don't beat them over the head with it, because they're not going to be as amenable to that. So this is a case where an opposing counsel of mine, an exercise in knowing what authorities not to rely on. He was relying on federal district court cases and a state Supreme Court case involving all state law. So don't make the judge read your cases and authorities and ask themselves, so what? I mean, there's no risk of getting overruled by a federal district court when you're in the state Supreme Court litigating state law issues. So instead, choose cases that reach the right result, and cases obviously that are going to be binding on your court. So the goal is to subtly make the court think, wow, if I rule this way in this case, the same thing that happened in this case might happen to me. I might get reversed on appeal. And that's an important practice point to be thinking about. A lot of us, when we're citing boilerplate or general legal principles, it can be really easy not to read that opinion all the way to the end to see how the case actually turned out. The problem with that is your opposing counsel might read the case all the way to the end, or the court might read the case all the way to the end. And if the case actually ended up going against your client and against the position that you're advocating for, the court is going to notice that even if opposing counsel does it. So much better to sift through those cases and try to find cases not just with the best language, but also cases that come out the right way. So you're not likely to get hit with a question or argument that says, well, counsel, you rely heavily on this case, but that case actually went against you in the outcome. How is your case any different? How should the outcome be different? So things to think about. And again, the pathos, the ethos, and the logos of your argument. So I hope if you take nothing away from our time together today, I hope that you will take away that persuading judges to rule in your client's favor is about so much more than just the logic of your arguments. It's about so much more than just getting the right arguments on the page. There's a lot more to persuading them. It's about the pathos. It's about the ethos. It's about every decision you make, filtering it through that lens of how is this going to help the judges like me and my client? How is this going to help the judges trust me that I'm telling them the truth on everything presented here? And how is this going to help the judges to want to join me and feel like they can and should join me based on the logic of the arguments that I'm presenting? So that's a presentation for you today. If you have questions, I'd love to hear them. Like I said at the outset, my email address is there on the screen for you. It'll be in your materials as well. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to answer any questions you have for me there. So I will leave it at that for you today. Thank you all for attending this presentation. And at this point, I will hand things back over to Jeff.
Thank you, Chris. That was brilliant. Now let's look at how Lexbe's Gen AI-powered e-discovery platform helps amplify each of these three persuasive pillars in modern litigation. Lexbe Copilot really helps transform your raw discovery data and documents into humanized, emotionally resonant narratives. To the right, you can see Lexbe Copilot in action as we selected on several medical records that have different formats, and we're summarizing them into a single report based on the provider, the date of treatment, the medications prescribed, the reasons for the visit, and the prognosis. With Lexbe Copilot, you can generate the summaries, timelines, key event narratives that you need to really amplify Pathos for your cases. Lexbe Autopilot is Gen AI-powered document review for responsiveness and privilege. So one of our customers had 50,000 documents that had to be reviewed for responsiveness to get a production done within 2 weeks. The managed review company she was talking to quoted her a very expensive price. She came to us. We implemented Lexbe Autopilot. It also codes out the issues so you can comply with the order of production in the RFP. And we were able to get it done for a fraction of the price of the managed review company. And certainly met her, actually did much better than meeting her deadline. We got it to her way in advance. So not only is Gen AI-powered document review for responsiveness and privilege more affordable, it's also done in an extremely timely fashion. It generates better precision and recall scores often than humans. It doesn't get tired. And then it also gives you much more credibility before the court than traditional technology-assisted review because it's fully transparent. It gives you a confidence score for each document. It also gives you the rationale for its prediction for each document. so you've got everything you need to get that production out the door on time and amplify your ethos. Lexbe Pilot allows you to instantly analyze your entire case. It generates a strategic case insights report, timelines, and entity maps, among other things. You can ask it any question that you have about the case. On the right is an example of a strategic case insights report from the Deepwater Horizon case. It also includes causation. It strengthens the logic of your argument by giving you immediate visibility into the relationships, causation, and chronology. It really is the ultimate early case assessment tool and facilitates building much stronger arguments. Jordan Howlett really views Lexbe Copilot as giving him an advantage. David Jones was up against AmLaw heavyweights and came away with a positive verdict for his client utilizing the Lexbe discovery platform. Paige Tackett really needed our speed here to get a production out the door fast. And again, we process over 1 million documents an hour in our e-discovery platform. And then Patrick Biggins really needed an easy to use e-discovery platform and affordability. So all of those fared well. We serve mid-sized firms, AmLaw firms. And with that, I'll go ahead and wrap things up. Thank you, Chris, for such a timeless reminder that persuasion is both an art and science. And thank you to everyone for attending, for joining us on this journey where ancient wisdom meets modern AI in litigation. And if you'd like a demo of Lexbe's Gen AI tools or to see how they can elevate your persuasive edge in upcoming matters, please indicate that on the survey at the end of today's session, and please fill that out. It helps us improve these webinars. Until next time, stay persuasive, stay innovative, and as Aristotle might say, let reason guide your eloquence. All right, have a great day.